And then CMON announced it earlier this month, end of last month, whatever it was, when the earnings reports came out for CMON. Are they in trouble? There's smoke, but is there fire? Final Frontier, Greater Than Games, Boardlandia, and a lot of other people, 90 or so, that are on that Board Game Geek list in terms of projects that have so far announced how it's affecting them or what they're doing, are, well, showing signs of some stress. Let's go. Okay, we're just going to read it and we're going to analyze it as we're going along here with CMON, right? An update on our internal teams and company focus. And it's the most important thing with this from the get-go is that CMON has not been a, what we will say, good communicator in any shape or form for crowdfunding purposes, during campaigns, post-campaign, and even just not related to anything else. And so when this trickles out, the main first question I have to ask myself is, what caused them to put something out now? Why now? Why not earlier last week? Why not last month when all that stuff was going on? Why not wait and say this later? What I wonder, though, at the same time, we have not really seen, and maybe this is what you can allude to it now, having some retrospection in this regard, is that have you heard about any projects since Massive Darkness Dungeons of Shadowreach? No, you have not, in fact, which is exactly the opposite of what happened in 2024. What I mean by that is in 2024 was essentially a murderer's row of game announcement on a monthly basis. The Dune War for Arrakis expansion. Blech, if I can get that out. Dune War for Arrakis expansion. The Super Fantasy Brawl Reborn. Marvel United Witching Hour. Dead Keep. Cthulhu Death May Die Forbidden Reaches. Degenesis Clan Wars. God of War. Song of Fire and Ice. Masters of the Universe. All of these basically almost averaging one a month in that time frame. And with all of the speculation on the monitoring on their little where are things at now design monitor on their webpage, people, like myself included, when this previous announcement came out, said, holy F-balls, Batman, you got 17 different projects or so in various places of fulfillment and production. And consequently, we have not really seen anything, was where I'm going with this, since Dungeons of Shadowreach. And so that flies directly into the face of what they did previously. Now, again, what we're trying to do here, or also what we're trying not to do, we have objective data. We're trying to subsequently, many people, put subjective interpretations of said data in the first place. And if you are a scientist, if you have done statistics, you know that you can make statistics say whatever you want. 100% of the people that we talked to about Russian roulette said that it was completely safe. Well, 100% of those people are still alive. You're not, however, surveying all of the people that may have died from Russian roulette. Ergo, selection bias. Ergo, all of these have biases in the first place. And so the question is, how much can you read into this? And the problem is, right now, anyone who is telling you with any definitive nature is absolutely and utterly making it up, right? There's no other way around it. Okay, so let's go back to this and let's get to the nitty-gritty now that we've had the preamble. Our community means a lot to us. Okay. You know what? The cynics in us are all saying right now, you like our money because your policies and your practice are not as consumer friendly as maybe they should be. So we felt it was important to share with you some difficult decisions at our company today. Okay, difficult for who? Given global conditions and most notably the situation with tariffs, CMON has decided to focus on the current commitments to our customers and partners. Now that's interesting because it doesn't really say what they're gonna do with some of that, but they go on, so we'll get there. Prioritize the timely delivery of existing projects. Ooh, okay. I mean, that's generic. I like hearing that, but that doesn't fill me with anything different than what you should be doing already in that regard. Okay. So effective immediately, we will be pausing what? Pausing all future game development and now new crowdfunding campaigns until the trade conditions have stabilized. Okay, let's break that down. Pausing all game development. The tricky thing with game development, just like with the building manufacturing in America that we've talked about with the whole tariff situation, right? Is that you can't do this overnight. And it's going to take significant forethought in terms of where things are going to go. So this is not an immediate problem, right? But just like with manufacturing in America, if you want manufacturing in America to be good, it's going to take a couple of years to build it up to that point. However, with games like this, as someone who particularly is against projects coming with half-completed, no rule book style page game campaigns, what that means is that either one of two things is going to potentially happen. Again, this is me making supposition and subjectivity based on objective information that they have provided with us. I'm not saying that they're telling us everything or telling us the truth. Those two things are completely different. This is objective in terms of what they're saying, and now on my interpretation. Future game development. To get a future game developed, then, it's going to take time. And if you are really restricted, right, as people are supposing, if the cash flow restriction becomes an issue in the near future, one of two things is going to happen with new projects. New projects are going to come out even further in advance to get that cash advance to rob Peter to pay Paul in some way, shape, or form. Not that a lot of businesses don't do this. It's not really always a Ponzi scheme. Like people like to throw that word around just as frequently as the other word that ends in ZI nowadays on either side of the political aisle. But it is something that happens. Or what happens is that you start things up and you come to the table with them as usual. But just like manufacturing, that's going to take time to build up, and you have the reserves in order to do that. And that was the whole CMON video previously, is that we don't know. They lost a large chunk of their cash reserves that they had from the last financial year or so in 2023. We saw that they had built up, though, significantly more cash reserves from previous years. The problem is we don't know how much of those cash reserves that were built up, somewhere between the lines of like $5 and $10 million of excess, and the 2.1 or so between 1.4 and 2.1 of loss that they incurred. We don't know how much of that loss took out a chunk of the stuff that was already there. Because this stuff that was already there, as Stonemeyer Games and Jamie talks about over on his blog with his tariff example of how you're recouping and reinvesting this in order to keep things going. Not in a Ponzi scheme way, but just in this is how businesses always operate. Expand, grow, or recycle. And so that's the question, right? If you have $10 million here and you lost 2.1 and you have 8, that's fantastic. You can sit on this for a while. These 17 projects aren't hurting. But if you already refurbished and recycled a significant chunk of that money, if you recycled $7 million of that to get some of these other IPs, to get some of these other brandings, to get some of those other development since then, and you only have that 3 left, and now you've lost 2.1, how long can you sit on that 900,000? And that's the problem, right? It could be one, it could be the other, it could be anywhere in between. We don't know. So anyone saying that this is going to be the tipping point for them, going over, or that they knew it and they've been seeing it coming, and you don't. You may fear that, but you are assigning your thoughts to a situation that we have no knowledge of whatsoever. And so all of these armchair quarterbacks saying, ha ha, I told you so, ha ha, this is what's going to happen, ha, this is what I know is, you don't. So shut up for a second. Okay. Now, the tricky part here is, they don't talk about new retail projects, right? Sometimes it's in what you say, sometimes it's in what you don't say. Future game development, okay. Future game development. Does that mean you already have a few other things in your back pocket that we're going to be seeing that have already been developed that you haven't announced, or they're still going to run? And it doesn't talk anything about the retail side of things, because there is a pre-order page at the time of me filming this over for The Adventurers on CMON, a collector's edition. And so it doesn't talk at all about that. Another thing as a side tangent right there. Now, next paragraph. Unfortunately, this involves extremely difficult staffing situations affecting all of our creative teams with reductions. We did not make this choice lightly, and our thoughts are with everyone impacted. That's nothing different than necessarily what's going on with Greater Than Games too, is that they are not like Flat River Group shuttering down, but they are reallocating and letting go a significant portion of people in order to stay afloat, right? It's the boat that's sinking as you try and chuck stuff off so it becomes lighter so it doesn't sink as fast as it otherwise would. Sometimes it still sinks. Sometimes you chuck enough stuff off and you can patch the hole up quickly enough that you don't sink all the way. But which one is this? Again, no way. We are incredibly grateful for their roles in our success over the years, talented people we miss professionally and personally, blah, 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 blah. The industry continues to rapidly evolve. Self-inflicted gunshot wound here going on in the US. Unpredictable situations like recent tariffs, COVID, present challenges for everyone in board games. With that said, it's our responsibility to take difficult measures to ensure we can keep current projects on track and deliver them in a timely manner. Keep them on track? Well, I would argue that a significant portion of them are not on track. Timely manner, I would argue that a significant portion of them are not in a timely manner in what was projected whatsoever. And that's even potentially including the 6-month over-under that happens with most crowdfunding projects, where we say, this is your projected date. If I get it 6 months later than that, then I'm relatively still pleased. Then we will go on, of course, resume new development as soon as possible. Please rest assured that these decisions will help ensure we are keeping our commitments to our backers, partners, and community. Now, interestingly enough right there, I would argue that the word choice at the end there is probably not reflective of the actual order of importance. The backers, partners, and community. I would argue that community is in the right place, probably third. I would argue, though, that at the same time, partners are going to go before backers. They're investors. They people with the money and the say-so and the investment on that side of things, the larger scale investors. That is their main priority. And those are the people that are probably most worried. Those are the people that are going to get theirs first if things go south. As a backer right now, that begs the question. Are you worried? How much money do you have tied up in this? I covered this when I previously talked about it, I don't know, like a year or two ago. I said, if one of these companies goes under, right? This was like, I don't even know if this was during COVID or slightly in the middle towards the end of COVID, where I said, you know what if one of these big companies goes under? What if Mythic goes under? What if Awakened Realms goes under? What if CMON goes under? Would you sit there and tally up how much money you have basically invested in these companies? I don't even know if I can call them investments in that way, because investments also maybe implies or has alluded to that you could divest in them, meaning you could get something back or get out of it in that way. And that's the tricky point here, right? As I covered in the other recent tariff video, of these projects that went recently on GameFound. And this is a GameFound situation too, where everyone is pointing at these companies, but truth be told, I think part of the blame eventually is going to fall on GameFound, because they're sort of going a wink, wink, nod, nod in this situation at the same time of this stable pledge. And again, I covered it in the previous video. Stable pledge in theory sounds good, but now when you're enabling companies to add tariffs separate from the costs that are potentially where the stable pledge covers in terms of some of the shipping or the actual cost, and you allow them to circumvent that, stable pledge is basically worthless. And there are a fair number of these CMON campaigns as well that aren't even part of stable pledge in the first place. When I go to the Magic Darkness page, for example, there's no mention of that. However, there is mention of US import tariffs now, which I don't believe was on there originally, that says the CMON shall absorb tariff costs up to 10% of the manufacturing costs of your pledge, but reserves the right to request any difference in such imported tariffs that exceed 10%. I don't think that wording was there. So this is like a late backing page. So I guess the question is, if they snuck that in there afterwards, does GameFound do anything? Does GameFound care? And when I'm looking through these pages, right, this should be one of the easiest things to find on any GameFound page, but it doesn't even have its own section. It's just always under the refunds and cancellation pages. And so when I'm scrolling through all of the previous crowdfundings from CMON, not Gods of War, not Dungeons of Shadowreach, not more of the recent Cthulhu Death May Die, it's really only under DC United where that stable pledge portion of things is in there. Even on GameFound across the board, it's kind of a crapshoot. So if you can get around it, or you don't even make people do it, I mean, what good is it if it's not actually any protection because no one opts in to fill the extremely specific criteria that are going to trigger it in the first place? So if you're, in case you're one of those people looking at it right now and going, yeah, Chris, I'll just go get a refund. No, you probably won't. And I say that as someone who has 2 pledges of CMON. So again, it's not that I'm saying, haha, see you later. I'm including myself here in these situations. And that goes back around to this sort of argument or debate that I saw with the Bitewing article, where they were talking about things where they said crowdfunding is going to be a little bit easier because we've got more streamlined. We don't have to worry about the middlemen. But at the same time, if you've now got someone with CMON where they're going to pause a lot of the crowdfunding and where that income is going to be coming in, well, then you have to have retail support enough to keep you afloat. And that also means that you have to have enough product over here potentially as well to keep that floating along. And when everyone's sitting here quarterbacking from their lazy boys and their couches that nobody has an answer to. Like, do you know how much stock CMON has in product over here? Do you know how well that some of their retail stuff is selling? You don't. And so if they have a significant flow in that regard, well, then they're probably better off. But if they don't, that's where things are going to get a little rough potentially. And we may not know until it already passes. Nobody knows their true financial situation at this point, just like with a lot of these companies. Boardlandia, like if you had told me that they were all of a sudden going to go out of business, I would have been shocked. Now, Frontier, that's a whole nother issue. There were obviously some cash flow problems there and some just significant delays with some of their products. So, yes, sometimes the smoke is there. The signals are there. And sometimes with our own biases, we choose to interpret those signals one way or the other. Sometimes your eyes are deceiving you because of how your brain processes this information. And depending on which side of the CMON fence you're falling on with the haters and the pitchforks and the torches versus the I've got stuff tied up in on them, your interpretation of this stuff may vastly differ. But let's be clear here. Some of these other comments are horribly unhelpful. They're even hurtful. When you've got comments like, if CMON goes under, nothing of value will be lost. That's not true. Other comments like, well, CMON really hasn't put out any really good games whatsoever, so what's the actual loss there as well? Again, these are hurtful, but they're also just untrue, going back to that bias and that lens we were talking about, right? Someone posted on Reddit that was like, okay, well, they haven't put out anything good. Well, they've got about 11 games in the top 500. And comparatively to a lot of their contemporary publishers, that's significant. And no, that's not including things that are not uniquely theirs. That's only uniquely ones that are theirs. Stonemaier has like 9. Mindclash has like 5. So, I mean, like comparison-wise, and it's not, again, a quantity over quality situation, because if it was, then companies like Mythic or even Steamforge putting out, like game after game after game would have ones that high. And so you can't just say, well, this is great for the industry, because they've put out a lot of really fantastic games that a lot of other games and companies have used to stand on their shoulders to put out subsequent things. Whether you like it or not, Arcadia Quest, Zombicide were incredibly inventive. I know it's going to be divisive in the comment section down below. They were incredibly inventive and innovative when they came out. Are they as much now? No. But they still really do have a lot of that in spades originally, because the other flip side of that is, well, I mean, there's not a whole lot new innovative in terms of just brand spanking new. So everything is a subsequent iteration of previous. So the influence that they have has not gone unnoticed. Now you can flip that around and say also, well, the FOMO and the exclusivity has also had a bad trickle-down effect on many ways. And now we're seeing it leach into the deluxification side of things, which is a whole nother side of things I don't like either, but it's a continuation, stand on the shoulders of that aspect of exclusivity, and I don't like that in any regard. But you can't just dismiss it either. This is a more nuanced conversation because, again, there's still people behind this regardless. There you go. Peace out. Let me know what you think.